Hello Bookish friends, welcome to my first video of Books of Alfred Hitchcock project. In this video I will talk about the books that was adapted into silent movies that Alfred Hitchcock directed in 1925, 1927 and 1928. And also briefly compare the books with their silent movie adaptations. For this project in January I read The Pleasure Garden by Oiver. In February, I read The Ledger by Mary Belloc, and in March, I read the stage play The Farmer's Wife, written by Phillpotts. For each book, I will first of all give my opinions of the book at the time that I read them by inserting clips from the subsequent wrap-ups. And then I will briefly compare the adaptation with the original work. First book on the list, which was The Pleasure Garden by Oiver. Oiver was a female author who wrote in many different pseudonyms. This book, we are following the lives of two friends who are very different from each other. One of them is Gaynor, who's a chorus girl with limited talents and a classical beauty. She has a very kind heart and a very strong maternal instincts, and she looks after animals that looks helpless, and that's how she befriends Laurie, who looks very innocent and lost in an audition. Laurie has an innocent beauty that appeals to male audiences. She can dance quite beautifully. She gets the bigger part in the audition because she has a passion for materialistic things, especially jewels. She goes through a very different path than Gaynor. Follow the lives of these two young women all throughout the book. This book made the history for me in Goodreads. As of right now, I am the only person who rated this book on Goodreads. And I rated the book 8 out of 10. I was very pleasantly surprised by this book. Although it has some outdated themes such as racism, which was actually a fact in 1920s Europe, and a bit idealized version of a woman who prefers traditional roles. On the other hand, especially the character of Laurie was very complex, even though she was very selfish and had motives which were very unlikable. Because we follow the story from her point of view, we can understand some of the things that she is going through, and she goes through feelings of remorse and regret sometimes, though it does not last. We actually cannot feel hatred for this woman. Such a character would be evil in many of the books written in those times, so it was very different in that sense. Although Gaynor's more traditional values were clearly praised and approved all throughout the book, it was also clear she was not a very clever woman, although she had a heart of gold. Those complexities in the characters were true for almost all of the side characters too. In summary, it was a book that I very much enjoyed reading, and I gave The Pleasure Garden by Oiver an 8 out of 10. The Pleasure Garden was adapted into a movie in 1925. It is the first movie that Alfred Hitchcock completed, and it stars Virginia Wally, Carmelita Gararti, and Miles Mander in the silent movie. The plot very generally follows the book, but the names of some of the characters were changed because this book has a very complex plot actually. In silent movies, the plot has to be simple, so some of the parts of the book were changed to simplify the very complex events and the very complex emotions that the characters go through. One of the most successful aspect of the book was that it was using different points of view, but in silent movie this was impossible So they had to change it to have it in the third person point of view. That was another way to simplify the plot to make it more applicable to silent movies. Of course, in silent movies, overacting is necessary because, with the exception of title cards, the characters do not use dialogues. There was overacting for sure. And also, being a fan of Alfred Hitchcock and seeing the silent movie for the first time, I realized that he used the light as means of giving visual effects very professionally, even in this very early film in his career. So even though I'm not a big fan of silent movies in general, it was actually aesthetically very pleasing. So overall, I gave The Pleasure Garden, the movie, a 6 out of 10 in IMDb. The second book that I read for my Books of Alfred Hitchcock project, The Lodger by Mary Belloc Lowndes. This book was adapted into an Alfred Hitchcock silent movie with the same name, The Lodger. This book is very heavily inspired by Jack the Ripper murders, and it tells the story of a murderer whose method is very much like Jack the Ripper actually. But in this book he is called the Avenger. The story is mainly told from the point of view of a landlady who suspects that their lodger is the serial killer mentioned in the newspapers. First of all, I found this book to be very modern. I found the writing style to be very easy to understand, considering it was written in 1913. It could have been shorter, but I really did like the slowly growing suspense of the book. And towards the end, I felt very much worried for our characters. So this shows that it was a good thriller for me. Because it was written in the beginning of the century, I felt like that I was reading a historical mystery, although it was written as a contemporary work. Being a fan of historical mysteries and historical fiction in general, I very much enjoyed reading and the way that the city of London was portrayed in the book. But I saw the potential of a very good Alfred Hitchcock movie in this book while reading it. So to sum it up, I was very pleasantly surprised by this book, like it was the case in the book that I read in January for this project, The Pleasure Garden. I gave The Lodger an 8 out of 10. The Lodger was adapted into a 1927 movie by Alfred Hitchcock, of course, and it starred a very famous British actor at that time, Ivor Novello, as well as June Tripp and Mary Adult. This was the first suspense film directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Hitchcock himself says that this is his first signature movie. And as regards to the faithfulness to the book, it is not very truthful to the story, to be honest. But you can see the general theme, the suspicion of the landlady, based on the true story actually in history. And to make it more appealing, a love story was added between the lodger and the landlord's daughter. And ending was actually changed to make it more acceptable to the viewers because of the popularity of Ivor Novello, with the exception of overacting, of course, which was, as I mentioned in the previous movie, it was necessary for silent movies. I thought it had an excellent use of cinematography and light in black and white pictures. There was a staircase scene as well as a ballroom scene, which was actually a foreshadowing of his excellent use of cinematography in his later films. And the first Hitchcock cameo appeared in this movie as an employer in the newspaper room. In summary, I very much enjoyed this silent movie, and considering the time that this movie was produced, I gave it a quite high rating in IMDb, which is 8 out of 10. The Farmer's Wife, which was produced in 1927, was adapted from a stage play called The Farmer's Wife, a comedy in 3 acts by Phillpotts. This play is like a cross-section of classical comedies and modern sitcom type comedies. It mainly involves a romance plot in which every character fancies someone, but that someone fancies another one. But all of the characters do find their spouse and happiness at the end of the play. I very much enjoyed reading the play. It took me about a day to read it. It was very easy to follow, although it was written in 1916. I really do like watching such plays in the theater because it makes me feel so good. The lesson that the play was trying to give at the end could be considered common for our times, but I'm sure it was considered a bit challenging for the values in those times. That was something that I found very interesting. In summary, I really enjoyed reading this play, and I gave it a 7 out of 10. Farmer's Wife was adapted into a silent movie in 1928. It starred Jameson Thomas, Lillian Hall Davis, and Gordon Hawker. When I watched this silent movie, I thought the adaptation would have been much better as a movie with dialogues because it was adapted from a stage play. The wit of the play was very much in the dialogues. Of course, as a silent movie, it was impossible to give all of the wit in the dialogues, so some changes were necessary to make it as witty as the original play. To make this, some characters and some side stories were omitted in the movie, and it concentrated on just the main plot, which was the farmer's search for a suitable wife for himself. Additional physical comedy was added by the character of Butler, which I think worked fine in the movie. But in terms of basic plot points, I think it was the most faithful adaptation among the works that I read. And I quite enjoyed watching it as much as I can enjoy silent movies. I gave this movie a 7 out of 10 in IMDb. So those were my thoughts on the books that was adapted into earlier silent movies by Alfred Hitchcock. It was a very interesting experience to read those books that were not by many readers. Actually, I was the only person who rated both The Pleasure Garden and The Farmer's Wife. Lodger was more popular than the others. But I found those earlier works very compelling. It was interesting to see how they were changed to be adapted into silent movies, which were also quite decent and of course showed the talent of Alfred Hitchcock even in those times. So please comment down below what is your favorite Alfred Hitchcock movie. And if you're a new viewer, first of all, welcome. Please like and subscribe. Hope to see you very soon. Bye! As for Turkish word of the day, I'm going to choose silent since we talked about silent movies. Silent means sessiz in Turkish, and sessiz is our Turkish word of the day. Have a good day.